Hi, I'm Joe and welcome to the channel and welcome to the second video on this deep dive series I'm doing on the major scale. If you didn't see the first video, I'll go ahead and fly one of those cards up there so you can get started. But the very basic premise is this: we're taking the major scale and we're listening to how it sounds over a very common chord progression. So the first video we took a look at it over the root chord. In this video we're going to take a look at it over the 5 chord. And the video following this will be over the 6 minor chord. And the final video in this series will be talking about the major scale over the 4 major chord in the progression. Let's go ahead and grab a guitar and get started. Okay, so where we last left off our hero, the major scale, we were playing it over the 1 chord in this progression. And in this video, we're going to play it over the 5 chord. But just as a reference again, let's go ahead and play it over the 1 chord on a loop, just so we can hear what it sounds like, the notes. The root, 2nd degree, 3rd degree, 4th degree, 5th degree, 6th degree, 7th, the root again. Now I'll play it without talking this time so we can just listen. So as we talked about in the first video, there's certain notes in there that just sound great over the chord. And in that case here was the root, the 3rd, and the 5th. No surprise, because that's what makes up that chord. We also said that the 4th degree isn't bad, but it kind of wants to resolve down to the 3rd degree, or it wants to go up to the 5th degree. It wants to go to one of those chord tones. The 2nd degree wasn't bad, but it still didn't seem as solid as the root. So if I was playing a D, if I play 2nd, it kind of still wants to go either down to the root or to the 3rd. We also found that the 5th degree is fine, because I already talked about that, but the 6th degree, that B causes tension, and the 7th degree, that C sharp, kind of causes tension until we get back to the root. So that's how it felt like over the 1 chord. Now let's go ahead and loop the 5 chord, which will be A. And notice this. Notice how the flavor of those notes change. And I think what you're going to find is very interesting. Even the root note won't necessarily sound like the root note anymore. Well, you'll see what I mean. Okay, so here's our 5 chord. So we're playing in A now. Let's go ahead and play with the root. Root, 2nd degree, 3rd degree, 4th degree, 5th degree, 6th degree, 7th degree, and the root again. Now I'll play it without talking. Isn't that interesting? At least to my ears, suddenly the root note, the 3rd, didn't sound quite as good over this A. There's the open A, D, and here's the 3rd, F sharp. The 5th sounded great. Well, why is that? Because that's now the root note of this A chord. So isn't this interesting? So let's analyze now the same exact notes, but what would they be in relationship to the A chord? Well, if I'm playing A and I play D, that's the suspended 4th. And you probably played that a couple of times. And just like the suspended 4th that we talked about, on the first chord, this note kind of wants to resolve to the third of that chord. Well, what's interesting about that is that's actually the 7th degree of the scale. That is a C sharp. So we went from the root down to the 7th degree. And if we remember properly, over the 1 chord, that 7th degree did not sound as good as it sounds now over the 5 chord. See how that D, the root, resolves itself to the C sharp, which is the 7th degree of the scale, but the 3rd of this chord. So it just goes to show you, you may not like one note for one chord, but you'll notice over a different chord it has a totally different flavor, different characteristic. And in this case, it sounds good. Well, what did the 2nd degree, which would be E, sound like? Sounds pretty solid, right? Because that is now the 5th of the A chord. There's the E. And we all love power chords, which is just the root and the 5th. So now the 2nd degree of the scale, of the D scale, which didn't sound so good over the D. Didn't sound terrible, but it's not that good, not as strong. It sounds fantastic over the A, because it's now the 5th of that chord. We already talked about the 3rd. Kind of has some tension. The 4th degree, which is G, doesn't sound very good at all, because that actually, if I were to play a G in this chord, it would be fine if I did it in the chord, because that would be a dominant 5 chord, which wants to resolve to the 1 chord. But since I'm playing just a regular A major chord, that G now is clashing. The A, we know, sounds great. The 5th degree sounds great because we're obviously playing the 5 chord. The B doesn't sound too bad. And then we've all played that kind of that open, like, add 9 chord. Or I should say that's a sus2 chord on that. So that might work, but to my ear that kind of wants to resolve down to the root. Or it wants to go up to now the C sharp, which was the 7th degree. What we already talked about is actually the 3rd degree of this chord. So that kind of B either wants to go down to the A note or up to the 3rd. And of course we already talked about the D, the octave, over this A. Hear that as wanting to resolve when it's up here. Because that would be the sus chord that we talked about. So isn't that interesting? How the flavor completely changed of the same exact notes of the major scale when we played them over the 5 chord. So again, as I did in the last video, I'm going to go ahead and drop in the description below this track. And you can pull it up and maybe loop it in your DAW of just over that chord, over the 5 chord in this case, and play your scale over it. And then also practice when you come to a note that kind of creates some tension, try to resolve that note to one that sounded better, and then try to analyze yourself, why does that sound better? Is that because I'm now landing on the 3rd of that chord, like we discovered from the root to the C sharp? And just try to get more acquainted with how these notes kind of want to move in the scale based on the chord that you're playing over. Well, would you look at that? We're already halfway through this series. The next video up is going to take a look at the major scale over the 6th minor chord. Hey, if you haven't done so already, would you do me a favor and consider helping me grow the channel by subscribing down below, hit the like button, and of course knock on the bell and you'll be notified when that next video comes out. As always, I'm so grateful for your support, and I wish you a wonderful day.